The night began in a way that still unsettles me, even after years of standing beneath the harsh lights of a burn trauma center. It was one of those evenings when the hospital felt unnaturally still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I remember glancing at the clock, registering the quiet, knowing from experience that this level of calm rarely lasted. And then, almost as if the universe snapped, everything changed in an instant. The ER doors slammed open with the unmistakable urgency of paramedics who had already seen more than they wanted to. Their voices cut through the stillness, sharp, breathless, layered with a tension only true emergencies produce. On the stretcher lay a man whose injuries were so severe that even the most seasoned among us faltered. That was the moment I first saw Michael Turner, a 32-year-old electrician, his body charred and broken by an electrical arc explosion that no one should have survived. The fluorescent lights flickered as we rushed him into the trauma bay, though I can't say whether that flicker was real or just the way memory distorts moments of chaos. The smell hit us immediately, a fusion of burnt wiring, melted cloth, and the unmistakable scent of human skin that had met impossible heat. It's a smell you never fully forget, no matter how many years you work in this field. My team moved with instinctive precision, but beneath that rhythm was a ripple of disbelief. Michael's clothing had fused to his body, and we cut carefully, knowing that any wrong move could peel away more than fabric. Someone called out vitals in clipped bursts, blood pressure dropping, heart rate unstable, oxygen saturation crashing. I remember answering without hesitation, but inside, something tightened, a quiet dread whispering that this case would test every part of us. Electrical burns are unlike anything else. Fire burns the outside, electricity burns the inside first. And as we assessed the extent of Michael's injuries, it became clear that the current had coursed through his body with brutal precision, creating damage we could only imagine. As I worked, I felt the familiar pull between medical detachment and human emotion, fighting to stay steady while standing face to face with suffering no one deserves. We tried to speak to him, hoping to keep him anchored, but Michael drifted in and out of consciousness in jagged waves. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment he looked directly at me, not with confusion, but with pure terror. His lips trembled as he whispered something faint, a phrase so fragile I almost thought I imagined it. But then he repeated it, stronger this time, shaking as he forced the words out. "Don't let it come back. Please." I leaned closer, trying to understand, but before I could ask anything, his body convulsed in pain, and the team rushed to stabilize him again. Those words hung in the air, heavier than the smoke-scorched smell drifting from his skin. I didn't know what he meant, none of us did, but something in the way he said it chilled me more than his injuries ever could. As we pushed toward emergency surgery, I realized I was holding my breath, locked between my duty as a surgeon and the intuition that we were standing at the edge of something darker than a catastrophic accident. I had treated countless burn patients over the years, but there was something about Michael, even in those first minutes, that told me this night would follow me for the rest of my life. Some cases leave scars on the memory, just as real as the ones left on the body. And as we wheeled him down the corridor, Michael's plea echoed again in my mind, a warning wrapped in fear I couldn't begin to decipher. I didn't know it then, but that whisper was the beginning of the most haunting case I would ever face in my career. Before the alarms, before the chaos of that night, before the terror that would unfold in his final hours, Michael Turner was simply a man living a life that, by all accounts, was.
Then, with a strained gasp, he tried to speak around the ventilator. The sound was muffled, broken, but the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. The nurse adjusted his sedation, and we all watched as his body slowly unclenched, like a storm receding. At first, I told myself it was delirium, the byproduct of shock and pain. But delirium has a fragmented look, confusion, disorientation. This was different. This was fear with a focus. Hours later, it happened again. His skin flushed, his muscles tightened, and once more he stared into that same corner. This time he mouthed the words more clearly. "It's here. Please don't let it touch me again." Cold drafts swept through the room during these episodes, the kind that make you instinctively pull your coat tighter, even in temperature-controlled environments. Monitors flickered, though our machines were stable. The nurses exchanged uneasy glances but kept working. Burn units are no strangers to strange behavior under extreme stress. Still, the tension in the air grew heavier each time Michael surfaced. I reminded myself of the medical explanations: ICU delirium, hypoxia, trauma echoing in the mind. These were rational, grounded answers. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael wasn't simply confused or hallucinating. There was intention in his fear, direction in his gaze, and a pleading urgency in his movements that suggested he wasn't just reacting to pain. He was reliving something profoundly disturbing. By the end of those first 24 hours, my team and I exchanged fewer words and more looks, the kind that silently ask, "Are you seeing this too?" It was becoming clear that Michael's battle wasn't only physical. Something else had taken hold of him, something we couldn't diagnose, measure, or treat. To understand the fear that clung to Michael during those hospital hours, we had to go back to the beginning, to the place where everything unraveled. The job site was an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of town, a cavernous building filled with steel beams, echoing footsteps, and the constant hum of machinery. It was the kind of place where danger existed quietly in the background, like a low note in a song you didn't consciously hear until it went wrong. When Michael hesitated, according to Derek, Michael paused mid-step, staring into the dim corner of the building as if someone had whispered his name. Derek asked if he was okay. Michael didn't respond right away, just kept staring, his posture slowly tightening, like he was listening to something Derek couldn't hear. When Michael finally spoke, it was barely above a murmur. "Do you hear that?" Derek didn't. The warehouse was quiet, too quiet. He shrugged it off, assuming Michael was tired, maybe stressed. But he would later tell investigators that the look on Michael's face unsettled him more than the explosion that came after. They approached the junction box. The forensic teams would later find evidence of a potential wiring fault, corroded connectors, moisture intrusion, the kind of hidden defect that could create a deadly arc flash under the wrong conditions. Everything on paper suggested a tragic but explainable accident. Electrical instability, atmospheric humidity, static discharge. A perfect storm of hazards aligning in one unlucky moment. But what happened next didn't fit into neat technical diagrams. Derek said Michael froze, completely, not in hesitation, but in fear, an instinctive, visceral fear. His eyes weren't on the junction box. They were fixed on that same dark corner, the same one that had drawn his attention earlier. Derek remembers opening his mouth to ask again if he was okay, and then there was no movement, no air draft, no one entered or exited. It just triggered. The room fell silent. Michael's breathing stopped for half a second, held between terror and something worse. And then he whispered with absolute certainty, "It's here." I've treated hundreds of burn patients. Pain can drive a person to hallucination. Oxygen deprivation, shock, even medications can create vivid distortions. But that night, standing in that cold, dim room, even I felt something crawl across my spine. Something I couldn't explain. Something I still think about. In the days that followed, Michael's condition improved physically, but psychologically he was spiraling. His wounds were healing, his grafts were taking, his vitals were stabilizing. Yet his fear, his absolute conviction that something was in the room with him, only grew stronger. Burn patients often struggle with pain hallucinations, ICU delirium, or trauma flashbacks.
I've seen them reach for invisible objects, call out names of long-dead relatives, scream at memories replaying behind their eyes. But what made Michael different was the consistency of his descriptions, the clarity, the unwavering certainty. He wasn't confused, he wasn't disoriented. He was terrified. Every morning, when the night shift handed over their report, the comments were the same. Patient awake most of the night. Patient refuses to sleep, states he can't let it get closer. Patient staring at the corner again. Patient asked multiple times if anyone else saw it move. By the third day of this, nurses were whispering about him at the station, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine unease. The kind of unease healthcare workers feel when a case stops following patterns they've learned to trust. Even the seasoned nurses, the ones who'd seen patients in states far worse than Michael's, avoided his room unless necessary. On the fourth day, Michael began describing the thing with unnerving detail. "It's tall," he said, "too tall to fit in the room unless it bends. Its head is wrong, like it's listening, but not with ears." He looked at me with eyes that barely blinked. "And it knows I saw it." Whenever he spoke this way, his heart monitor spiked in frantic bursts, as if the act of remembering physically harmed him. More than once, I considered sedating him fully just to give his mind a break, but the risk of respiratory suppression in burn patients made heavy sedation dangerous. Instead, we tried mild anxiolytics, grounding techniques, reassurance. Nothing helped. Then came the night of the worst episode. A code gray was called to his room, patient agitation approaching dangerous levels. When I arrived, 2 nurses were already with him, trying to prevent him from ripping at his dressings. The moment I walked in, I felt the same heavy stillness from the earlier night, like the room was holding its breath. Michael wasn't looking at us. He was staring upward. His body was rigid, every muscle tensed as though bracing again for impact. He whispered, "It's above me." His voice was dry, hollow, as if squeezed out through clenched lungs. One of the nurses tried to redirect him. "Michael, no one is above you. You're safe. You're in the hospital." He shook his head, slow and trembling. "It's on the ceiling." His eyes tracked something none of us could see, something moving, something approaching. And then he screamed, not like a patient in pain, but like a man whose mind had been pushed past its last barrier. Not a startled scream, not a confused scream, a scream of recognition. I grabbed his hand, trying to ground him. "Michael, look at me, you're here, you're safe." His gaze flicked to mine for the briefest second. And in the smallest, most broken voice, he asked, "Why can't you see it?" The room felt colder after he said that. Not metaphorically, literally colder. Several of us noticed it. A draft that wasn't. I told him about trauma loops, flashbacks, visual imprints the brain can't release. I reassured him that fear can distort reality, that the mind clings to the last moments before catastrophe. I said everything a clinician is supposed to say. But he just nodded slowly, as if we both knew the explanation didn't fit. Over the next several months, his wife called the hospital 3 times. Once during a panic attack, once because he wouldn't sleep for nearly 48 hours, and once because he'd woken up screaming, convinced something was standing over the bed. At his final scheduled follow-up, he showed me something unexpected, a small spiral-bound notebook. "I write everything down," he said, "when I see it, when I feel it, when it moves." He opened the book to a page filled with a single sentence, repeated dozens of times in shaky handwriting. "It knows I survived." The last time I saw him, he hugged me before leaving the exam room. It startled me. Patients rarely do that. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Thank you for trying." And then he walked out of the clinic. I never saw him again. Months passed. Life in the burn unit continued. New cases, new traumas, new recoveries. But occasionally, late at night during long shifts, I would think of him, of the way he stared into empty corners, of the way the air chilled in his room, of the way he screamed not in fear of death, but in fear of something watching. Then one day, during routine chart maintenance, I noticed something. A series of missed appointments logged by the outpatient clinic. Appointments Michael never showed up for. I called the emergency contact on file. His wife answered. Her voice broke before she finished the first sentence. Michael had passed away 2 months earlier. Not from complications of the burn, not from infection, not from physical injury. He died in his sleep. The coroner's report listed it as cardiac arrest, sudden, unexpected, without warning. But his wife told me something I still struggle to process. The night he died, she said, he woke me up. He said he couldn't sleep because something was in the corner of the room again. He asked me to turn on the bedside lamp. She paused, breath hitching. It was already on. Those words have stayed with me more than any autopsy report or clinical explanation ever could. There are moments in medicine that defy charts, scans, or textbooks. Moments when the line between trauma and something unexplainable becomes impossibly thin. Moments that force you to confront the limits of science and the shadows that live just beyond it. Michael was one of those moments. My most haunting case. The darkest thing I've ever witnessed. And sometimes, when I walk through the burn unit late at night and the hall lights flicker for just a second, I still hear his voice. Why can't you see it?